Hello, everybody, and welcome to our wonderful Wednesday live stream. This week, I am joined by Morgan Fox, our NORML political director. So happy to have you here, Morgan, today. And I am Jax James, state policy manager. We're going to kick it off by chatting with Morgan about some of the advancements and movement that's been going on at the federal level. And then while he gets back to work up in DC, I'm going to chat with you guys about some different moving legislation that's going on in a lot of the country. We've got a lot of exciting news going on. So Morgan, let me kick it over to you. I think the big thing that has been happening one of many, is the veteran legislation. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on up there?
Absolutely. So the VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act was just approved last week by the Senate VA committee. I believe this is the first time that a Senate committee has actually approved a cannabis policy reform bill of any sort. While that might be a little bit confusing because we got a study bill passed through both chambers and signed by the president last year, that was approved by unanimous consent, so it didn't actually go through any of the committee processes. So this is actually pretty momentous in seeing a committee actually pass something related to cannabis policy reform. Unfortunately, the bill itself doesn't really go all that far. It mandates, but I think a closer word would be suggests, studies into the efficacy of medical cannabis when it comes to PTSD and a number of other conditions that are prominent within the veteran community. And this is definitely a good step forward. We have also seen the House version of this bill be introduced last week as well. So it seems as if this is primed for movement through both chambers. And it's something that is across the board not objectionable on any grounds whatsoever. Unfortunately, this bill doesn't do really anything to protect veterans from discrimination for their legal cannabis use, whether that be for medical or adult use purposes. And it also does not allow VA doctors to be able to recommend medical cannabis in accordance with state laws where they're located. But at the very least, it is a recognition that there is a potential for a medical benefit for cannabis for veterans and for a number of the symptoms and conditions that are facing that community. So hopefully we'll see continued movement on that. But I suspect that we are going to see introduction of much more broad-ranging veterans-focused bills over the coming weeks that would actually do a lot more to protect veterans and improve their access to medical cannabis. So everybody stay tuned on that. We'll keep everyone updated as we can.
I have a question for you about that. So something that, we've talked about with legislators here in Texas is that there at least was a VA directive that did direct doctors at the VA how to put medical cannabis recommendations into the documents of veterans. Do you know if that is still in effect, or if that would be affected by this legislation in any way?
Well, so VA policy internally has been to not deny veterans benefits if they're state legal and registered patients. There may be some VA system doctors that feel comfortable recommending medical cannabis, but none of this is encoded into law. And so, these sort of protections and the leeway given to doctors that, the few that choose to take it could evaporate with a change of administration. And so the purpose of any of these bills is to really make sure that there is a legal directive and impetus for them to be able to continue these policies and not just have it be an internal policy directive.
Awesome.
Is kind of analogous to things like where, like in the past, the Cole memo, which provided guidance to the DOJ not to interfere with legal cannabis programs, wasn't actually law. It was just internal guidance. And a change of administration, change of attorney general, similarly to a change in the head of the VA, could mean that could all go away. So I think it's really important that we do everything we can to try to push even the smallest bit of incremental legislation across the finish line and make sure that is encoded into law to help better serve our veterans.
So essentially, this legislation would take perhaps that directive and make it official, not just a suggestion that could be changed based on administrative change. All right.
Well, the research legislation wouldn't necessarily do that, but
Mm.
it will provide impetus to continue looking at the issue, and I think will probably lead to more acceptance of medical cannabis as an effective treatment for a number of these conditions. Um, Hopefully, we'll be able to get more comprehensive veterans legislation passed during the current session, and I think that there's a lot of appetite for it on Capitol Hill right now.
Great. Is there something that the people watching today can do to help bolster support for this legislation?
Well, we're still waiting to see what sort of roadblocks we're going to come up on. So, but I mean, as always, just contact your members of Congress and tell them that you want more support for uh, veterans in terms of protecting their civil rights, protecting their benefits, and improving their access to medical cannabis across the board. Once we learn a little bit more about the path of some of this legislation, you can go to normal.org/act, and we will definitely have actions up there that will help you directly do that. But in the meantime, you can reach out directly to them through a number of different sources.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Anything else you wanted to highlight about the veteran movement?
Well, again, stay tuned for much more comprehensive legislation in the coming weeks. We will definitely be updating people as we learn more information and as those bills get closer to introduction.
Awesome. Now, I know you also wanted to highlight what's been going on with the Biden pardons and where we're at in that process. Do you want to go ahead and give everybody the rundown?
Absolutely. I just want to preface this by saying that it's absolutely vital to recognize that the Biden administration, in terms of its recognition of the failed war on drugs, and in particular how arresting people for cannabis is unjust and does not serve the greater public good, and the movement to institute a scheduling review and the movement to pardon people were historic. And the Biden administration has rightly been touting this as a major achievement. However, nobody has actually gotten any of these pardons yet. And unfortunately, the Department of Justice pardon page doesn't even have the ability set up yet or established for people to be able to pursue the pardon certificates that are necessary in order to help undo some of the stigma associated with a federal cannabis possession conviction. And I will put the DOJ site in the chat right now. But it's just unfortunate that months and months later we still don't have any sort of action on actually providing these pardons in an official sense, which is absolutely necessary in order for people to be able to have a little bit more leeway in background checks and be able to have an easier time getting things like employment, education, housing, professional licensure. The list goes on and on in terms of the collateral consequences of such an arrest and conviction. So we are currently pressuring the Biden administration to expedite this. We're hoping that some members of Congress are going to be able to join us in the near future in pressuring the Department of Justice to move on this more quickly. But if anybody out there would like to add their voice to this, go in the chat and contact your lawmakers, contact the White House, both the president and the vice president, and urge them to make these pardon certificates available as early as possible. Some of these folks have been waiting for years for relief in terms of these convictions, and they should not have to wait any longer just because of bureaucratic crawl.
All right, I'm making sure that these are getting into the comment section there. I've dropped the DOJ site and the take action on the delayed pardons by President Biden. So definitely everyone take a look there, participate in that. And additionally, I wanted to point out that on the website Morgan mentioned, normal.org/act, there are actually 2 federal action alerts there at the top that you can also participate in while we wait to see, what action can we take next on the veteran legislation that you mentioned, Morgan. Awesome. And I think that you mentioned that there was a couple other little things coming up and going on that you wanted to highlight for our viewers today.
Well, no, we're starting to see movement behind the scenes, and as well as publicly on some incremental legislation, particularly to uh, protect Second Amendment rights for registered medical cannabis consumers. And there are ongoing negotiations to move safe banking joined with expungement, or at least federal funding for state level expungement efforts, and potentially the Second Amendment issue, as well as maybe some other issues. But those are still ongoing negotiations. Nothing has been solidified or officially introduced yet in that regard, but I expect that we should see that within the next month and a half.
Okay, great. We actually have a viewer asking about the SAFE Act. So can you give them an update on like where does that stand right now, and what is the future of something that looks like the SAFE Act?
Well, the basic negotiations for that were have been going on for quite some time, and I think that a tentative deal was reached during the lame duck session of the last Congress. Now there are still negotiations going on. We've seen that Senator Schumer has been reaching out to both Democrats and Republicans on the issue. There's a lot of conversation on the House side about exactly what this package would entail and how quickly it can move. It remains to be seen exactly what that's going to look like. That being said, I think that we are going to potentially run into problems, particularly on the House side, when it comes to actually finding space to talk about these bills and get them to move through various committees. In particular, things like the Judiciary Committee that is devoting most of its time right now to various investigations that were promised during the midterm elections. So even if we can get a consensus of lawmakers behind the scenes actually making space for them in the committees that they need to go through in order to be brought to the floor for a full vote is going to be fairly difficult. Not impossible, though. And I think that the fact that lawmakers are starting to see that this is low-hanging fruit that's supported by a majority of voters on both sides of the aisle is going to be a good impetus for them to really start making some space for it. It just remains to be seen exactly when that could happen.
Yeah, people are like, yes, we've supported this. Can we get this done already? Right? So
Exactly.
awesome. Well, I don't see any other federal questions in the comments right now. So did you have any final thoughts before we pivot to state issues, Morgan?
Just the constant reminder that this is going to be a long haul. So don't lose hope. Keep contacting your lawmakers. And even for incremental bills, they might not be everything that we want, but they're important in getting us a little bit closer to more comprehensive, sensible legislation.
Yes, definitely. Don't let perfect stand in the way of good, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, it was really lovely to have you with me today, Morgan. And I know everybody enjoyed the update. And so I'm going to bid you adieu as we pivot over now to our state update. I am going to toggle over to my handy dandy spreadsheet and encourage anybody who is watching to go ahead and drop your state in the comment section here. And if you're not highlighted in my blog from today, I will make sure to circle back and cover anything that's moving in your state. Of course, in the description of this live stream, I have the link to the blog post today. We've got it broken down by topic. Legalization, decriminalization, medical access, additional bills that we support, and then legislation that we actually oppose, which there is some that we oppose, of course. So I'm seeing people from Indiana, Kentucky, Arizona, California. I definitely have some information for you guys. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to go over the legalization bills that are filed or moving, and then I'm going to come back to the comments here, okay? So dun, da, da, da. As you guys know, lawmakers in many states are filing marijuana law reform legislation. Some states are currently holding sessions and are having hearings. So let's start in the state of Hawaii. Hawaii was one of the states that we decided at the beginning of the year was one to watch because of some changes in the dynamics of the legislature there. And there is a Senate Bill 669 that would legalize the personal cultivation and use of small amounts of cannabis. This bill was amended and advanced out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So if you live in Hawaii, there is a link there that you can use to send a message of support for this effort. Minnesota, that was another state that, due to the changes in dynamics in the legislature that we were saying, is a to-watch state to legalize. We've got companion bills, House File 100 and Senate File 73, that would allow adults 21 and older to purchase 2 ounces of cannabis and home cultivate up to 8 plants. In addition, it creates a system of licensed private retail cannabis businesses where municipalities and counties could own and operate governmental dispensaries. Additionally, those with prior marijuana convictions would be able to have their records automatically expunged. The legislation would further allow for on-site consumption lounges and cannabis delivery services. It does also contain language banning the sale of unregulated synthetic cannabinoids, which is consistent with the Board of Pharmacy rules that were put in place last year. So the update here is that House File 100 has passed 10 separate legislative committees in the House, with this next hearing scheduled for tomorrow. And Senate File 73 has passed 8 committees in the Senate and also had a hearing scheduled today. I don't know the outcome of that as of yet, but definitely looks like if it follows in this trajectory, it should be passing its 9th committee. So if you are in Minnesota, great news there. New Hampshire, one of the few northeastern states that doesn't have a regulated adult use market. There are several bills that are moving. There's an amended House Bill 639 that would allow adults 21 and older to purchase, possess, or gift up to 4 ounces. Then there's House Bill 344, which seeks to permit adults to possess 3/4 of an ounce of cannabis, 5 grams of hashish, and certain cannabis-infused products. It also legalizes home cultivation of up to 6 plants. Lastly, House Bill 360 legalizes the possession and use of cannabis for those over the age of 21 by striking most of the references to cannabis or marijuana from the Controlled Drug Act of the state. So the updates here are a little bit extensive, so let me go over them real quick. House Bill 639 was amended and passed out of the House Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee. The bill, HB 639, next heads to Ways and Means in the House before it goes back to the floor and then to the Senate for consideration. We've got House Bill 360 and 344, which are scheduled for a hearing in the House Criminal Justice and Public Safety on the 17th and the 24th of this month, respectively. Now, in the blog itself, you'll find a link where you can actually even support testimony or your position on the bill. And there's also a link to our action alert there. So those of you in New Hampshire, definitely some movement going on there. Now, in South Carolina, Senate Bill 211 legalizes the adult use of cannabis by removing it as a Schedule I drug from the criminal code and providing an oversight for the regulation of its cultivation, sale, and product labeling. So there is an effort there in South Carolina that you can support through our action alert. Now, let me pivot back over here to the comments, see where else we got you guys watching from before I move on to some decriminalization efforts. Looks like we've also got Pennsylvania. I got a bill for you. Washington, D.C., Texas, my home state, here in Austin right now. Minnesota, we went over those for you. And Michigan. All right. Thanks for dropping that there, guys. I love seeing where you guys are watching from. So there's several decriminalization efforts that have either been filed or are moving. In Georgia, we have House Bill 388, which removes the criminal penalty for possession of less than 1 ounce of cannabis. If passed, no penalty would be implemented on people found with less than 1 ounce. In Georgia, there's House Bill 309 and Senate Bill 1072 that would decriminalize the possession of a personal use quantity of marijuana, which is defined as 1 ounce or less of cannabis, 5 grams or less of concentrates, and less than 1,000 milligrams in infused products. It would reduce the penalty from a criminal misdemeanor to a civil violation that would be punishable by a $25 fine or community service. So those are the two bills currently moving on decriminalization in the country. And let's talk a little bit about medical access. So in Illinois, House Bill 2430 would allow for the sale of cannabis seeds, seedlings, and cuttings to registered patients. Right now, medical patients don't have an avenue by which they can legally obtain these seeds, seedlings, and cuttings. So this would provide that they could now be purchased from licensed dispensaries. In North Carolina, Senate Bill 3 would create a cannabis program for qualifying patients. This bill was amended and passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. In North Dakota, House Bill 1478 wants to make it easier for those over the age of 65 to participate in the medical cannabis program. It would allow for individuals 65 and older to submit a form to the department identifying a diagnosis of a qualifying debilitating condition and their need for establishing eligibility. So essentially, this would allow for seniors to self-certify for medical cannabis in the state of North Dakota. HB 1478 has now passed the House 86-6. In Tennessee, we've got companion bills, House Bill 172 and Senate Bill 1461, which seek to create a medical cannabis program that would allow for possession up to 2.5 ounces of flower and 2,000 milligrams of cannabis-derived products. Now, HB 172 is scheduled for a hearing in the Health subcommittee in the House as of yesterday. I haven't seen the vote on that yet, so hopefully it will pass out. Although, in many states, they don't vote on the bill as the same day as the hearing. So hopefully we'll hear on that shortly. And then Senate Bill 1461, its companion, is scheduled for a hearing as well in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So hopefully more details on that bill advancing forward in Tennessee. In Vermont, Senate Bill 71 amends the state's existing medical cannabis program by expanding the pool of qualifying conditions and increasing the home cultivation limits for patients and their caregivers, among some other changes. So definitely some important perfecting amendments in Vermont. Let me come back over here and see if we have any other states tuning in right now. Indiana as well. Okay, so there's a few people that I do see your state is not on my list for today. So I'm going to come and circle back to you guys in just a moment. For those of you that are watching from California, because I did see that in the comments, we've got SB 285, which would authorize local jurisdictions to allow for the preparation and sale of non-cannabis food or beverage products by a licensed retailer or micro business in the same area where the consumption of cannabis is allowed. Then AB 374 would permit cannabis lounges to sell non-cannabis infused food and beverages while also allowing them to sell tickets to concerts and other events. SB 51 would authorize the Department of Cannabis Control to issue provisional licenses for local cannabis equity applicants. I don't know why that was so hard to say. For retail activities for up to 5 years if the applicant meets the requirements of the department. Now, in Colorado, we talked last week about Senate Bill 81, which would have reversed unduly restricted provisions upon recommending physicians based on some legislation that was passed in 2021. Unfortunately, not a positive update on this one. Senate Bill 81 did die in the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. So unfortunate there. Now, in Georgia, House Bill 387 seeks to grant unconditional pardons to all Georgia citizens and lawful permanent residents who've been convicted by the offense of a simple possession of marijuana violation. So this would be an expansion of or an enforcement of the Biden pardons that Morgan mentioned earlier in our live stream. In Illinois, Senate Bill 2321 would protect employees consuming cannabis off-job from any employment discrimination. Under the proposal, employees cannot be sanctioned for a positive drug test alone. However, employers would still be permitted to administer drug tests, and they still would be permitted to refuse to hire someone based on a positive drug test. In Maryland, House Bill 980 prohibits defendants in pretrial, probation, and parole proceedings from having their release revoked solely based on their use of cannabis. And it's not specific to medical cannabis, but any cannabis use. In Missouri, we've got House Bill 985, which seeks to remove the caps on the number of licenses that state officials can issue to cannabis producers and retailers. We did see some shortages during the pandemic in Missouri. And of course, market competition is almost always good for the consumers. So we do support this legislation. In New Jersey, we have Assembly Bill 5171, which would prohibit odor from being a justification for the police to search someone's vehicle. Under the bill, after the motor vehicle stop is initiated, law enforcement officers are prohibited from using a drug detection canine unless there's a reasonable suspicion that there is a dangerous controlled substance other than cannabis in the vehicle or on the person. Now, in New Mexico, we've got House Bill 314, which automatically would expunge criminal records for anyone charged with an offense involving cannabis that is no longer a crime as of June 29th, 2021, or that would have resulted in a lesser offense if the Cannabis Regulation Act had been in effect at that time. Now, this legislation, House Bill 314, was amended and passed out of the House Judiciary Committee. In New York, Senate Bill 4680 facilitates the expungement of marijuana-related convictions resulting from arrests made by the NYC Police Department between 2004 and 2012. Now, there's an interesting bill in Ohio, Senate Bill 26. It would amend the state's traffic laws so that those with trace levels of THC in their system can no longer be convicted of operating a motor vehicle as under the influence without any further evidence of impaired driving. This bill has been scheduled for its second hearing in the Senate Judiciary today. Now, under existing law, persons are guilty of a traffic violation if they operate a vehicle with even trace amounts of THC in their blood or THC metabolites in their urine, even absent any demonstrable evidence that they are impaired. Because THC and particularly their metabolites may be detectable for days or weeks post-abstinence, long after any impairment may have worn off. This law currently criminalize anyone who has consumed cannabis and has it in their system, even if they're not under the influence. And this would include state authorized medical cannabis patients. So while SB 26 does not do away with the limits altogether as we would prefer, it does allow those charged under the state to present evidence in court that they were not impaired and that they pose no legitimate traffic safety threat. By making such a change, impairment would simply be inferred, but the limits would no longer be per se. Consequently, the defendants who provide evidence in court that they were not impaired would be found not guilty, regardless of their THC or THC metabolite levels. Now, for those of you watching in Pennsylvania, because I know that I saw you guys in the comment here, under current Pennsylvania law, a person is guilty of DUI if they drive with any amount of a Schedule I substance or its metabolite in their blood. There is a bill, SB 363, that would amend the law and treat medical cannabis patients the same as those who use prescription medication by requiring proof of an actual impairment basis for the DUI conviction. This legislation is essential to ensuring that patients are not being charged with DUI for just the mere presence of their medication in their system with no proof of actual impairment. Now in Washington, I know that there was a few of you watching from Washington as well. House Bill 1614 will allow Washingtonians to home cultivate up to 6 cannabis plants. A single household may possess up to 15 cannabis plants, regardless of the number of individuals residing in the home. This bill, 1614, has passed the House Committee on Regulated Substances and Gaming and is scheduled for an additional hearing in the House Committee of Appropriations today. Now, this is the last bill I want to go over with you guys before I come back to the comments. Maryland. This is a bit of legislation that we oppose. House Bill 1147 establishes an arbitrary THC potency level for marijuana flowers, liquids, and solids and concentrates. If passed, the bill would prohibit adults from accessing any product that contains more than 15% THC. NORML opposes any proposed bans on cannabis products being that it only perpetuates the unregulated market. That is because outlawing these products just drive the production of sales of them exclusively underground. The result undermines the primary goal of legalization, which is to disrupt and ultimately replace the underground market with a transparent, regulated marketplace where products are tested for safety, clearly labeled, etc. So, of course, any states that are trying to institute a THC cap, NORML does oppose, as we do in Maryland with 1147. Okay, let me come back to the comments. The question was that Washington State or Washington, D.C.? So the legislation about home cultivation was for Washington State, just to clarify. Now, let me come back up here. And we've got some people watching from Kentucky. In Kentucky, there is legislation. Okay, so before I get into the states that you guys are watching from live right now, if I didn't go over them already, you go to norml.org/act. And whenever you see that dynamic map right there, you can hover over your state and it'll show you all of the active bills in your state. So for those of you watching in Kentucky, whenever I go over these bills, you can just go to norml.org/act, hover over Kentucky, and click on these so that you can email your legislator regarding them. There are 3 bills having to do with legalization, a bill having to do with decriminalization, and 2 bills having to do with medical cannabis in Kentucky. So definitely make sure that you check those out. Now, we discussed Missouri, so I know that you guys are up to speed on that new bill, but I did also want to let you know that in Missouri, there's quite a few bills having to do with medical marijuana parental protections, early release for marijuana offenses, medical patient privacy, marijuana banking, allowing medical cannabis on campuses, and opposing an open container law. So definitely in Missouri, there's more than just the one bill that I highlighted today, and I definitely encourage you to participate in those action alerts. Indiana, now I don't know that there's, yes, in Indiana, okay. In Indiana, there are 4 bills having to do with legalization, 2 bills having to do with medical cannabis, and 3 bills having to do with decriminalization. So definitely Indiana in the house, make sure you go click on your state and participate in those. Now in Arizona, there is legislation about adding conditions to the medical cannabis program, making sure that insurance can cover medical cannabis, and allowing for tenant protections for those that are enrolled in the program there. We went over California. We went over Pennsylvania. Now in Texas, there has been quite a few bills filed, many bills filed. There are medical cannabis bills. There are bills having to do with penalty reduction, aka a form of decriminalization here. And then there's also been efforts regarding legalization in Texas. So you can go to norml.org/act, hover over the Texas there and participate, or you can go to texasnormal.org and you can click on the 88th Ledge tab, and that will have a full list of every single bill that we are tracking, along with the 3 different action alerts that you can participate in. I did go over Minnesota and Maryland. Let's check on Michigan. Where'd you go, Michigan? Looks like there is not any currently filed legislation moving in Michigan. I discussed Indiana and Texas. Let me come down here. All right, well, it looks like I have gone over all of the states that you guys are watching from today. I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Morgan about what's going on at the federal level at the start of our live stream, and then kind of seeing a context of what is being filed or moving across the country. And then, of course, realizing that there's so many more. We are literally monitoring and tracking several hundred bills across the country. So I encourage you guys to click on the links in the description. You can go to normal.org/act to participate in our action alerts. Of course, click on the blog, but you'll also find information on how you can become a dues paying member or donate to our mission. Of course, we focus on patient and consumer advocacy, and all of our funding comes from small personal donations from people like you. And then there's also information about your local chapter. So if you are not involved with your local chapter, you can find out if there's one near you and make sure that you're really involved for this legislative session that is occurring across most of the states in our country. So on that note, guys, I just want to say thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to coming back next week, hopefully with more great news about the legislation moving across the country. So take care, everybody.